Good morning, and thank you everyone for coming. In 2019, I, through the Attorney General's office, convened a law enforcement technology task force to look forward at how are things changing, what pieces of equipment are out there, how can we reimagine the future of law enforcement. The world's changing around us so quickly. That actually ended up leading to an initiative that I hope will bear a lot of fruit over the next several years that we call internally COP 2030. And the idea is to look ahead and say, with technology changes, with the way the world is changing, with the availability of so much data, how should we be changing the way law enforcement approaches investigation and doing its job? One of the needs that was identified with that task force in 2019 is a way to detect fentanyl. You'll recall probably some stories, particularly back then when we were just becoming acquainted with how deadly fentanyl could be on contact, dermal absorption, that we had people that just barely came into contact with a tiny little bit of fentanyl and overdosed. And so having the ability to field test controlled substances is a critical officer safety issue. Another issue is that and I'm glad to see my friend Union County Prosecutor Dave Phillips here, and of course Marion County Prosecutor Ray Grogan is here as well, and his First Assistant Bill Owen. And one of the challenges is to have good bonds on major drug offenders, but without a drug test to say that that is in fact fentanyl or methamphetamine or what have you. And that usually doesn't come back from the lab quickly enough for a bond hearing. So we began conducting extensive research on the developing field of handheld mass spectrometry. Now, mass spectrometers are, of course, part of the lab arsenal at BCI. That's how we do testing. But as with everything else, things are becoming faster, cheaper, smaller, and it turns out that we could have a device that is highly reliable, very accurate, and does basically the same job in a light fashion that the big units at the lab do. Well, what's the lightness of it? And you'll hear from Jessica Toms here, who led our team in the evaluation process, and she'll show you and explain to you what it does. But at a high level, it can do the same kind of testing that we've always done for a smaller number of common street drugs. And we will have, we're announcing today that we are buying 3908 devices for a pilot program. And we're here in Marion because Marion City, which is really kind of, in some ways, ground zero for the trafficking that comes out of Detroit toward Columbus. We are working with them to develop this pilot program. What this will enable us to do is to put these out actually in service in the field. And just last week we had an instance, you might have heard about the two officers that were involved with the fentanyl trade down in Columbus that were arrested, unfortunately. There was a field test to confirm the fentanyl was present in that operation. So what I'm hoping to do is first officer safety. We want to have this technology available in the field so that officers know what they're dealing with, can take appropriate precautions. Secondly, to advance this information much earlier in the criminal process. And when we're dealing with people who are involved in large drug deals, we are hoping that this additional information will aid prosecuting attorneys in holding the bad guys pending trial, and because if they get out on bond, of course, we may never see them again. And finally, my personal hope is that for many of these drugs that we have validated, so some marked pharmaceuticals, methamphetamine, cocaine, these machines are as accurate as the BCI lab machines. And we are looking for cases to make this the normative proof of the nature of the substance. Every drug case, the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it's actually that controlled substance. This will enable them to do that quickly, and we're hoping that we'll convince the courts that the technology is so reliable that they can use that rather than a test of BCI to ascertain the nature of the controlled substance and to get the conviction. This is a major step forward, and right now I'd like to call on my friend, the Chief of Police in Marion, to come up and talk about how this will work on the ground. Jay McDonald. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. I want to thank all the elected officials, our partners in law enforcement, for coming here today. We're very excited to be a part of this pilot project because we believe the fight against the scourge of dangerous illegal drugs is the top priority in keeping our community safe. And we think that it takes really three parts to have an effective fight against fentanyl and methamphetamine. First, it takes a community that is engaged and is supportive of law enforcement and provides the information vital to make investigations go forward. Then it takes police officers, deputy sheriffs, and prosecutors who are committed to fighting drugs and keeping our community safe. And the third part of that is a scientific analysis that allows these cases to go from arrest to conviction. Without all three of those things, our community continues to be in danger of these drugs that kill hundreds and hundreds of Marion County citizens over the past few years. So there's no higher priority in keeping our community safe than fighting against fentanyl that has found its way from heroin to methamphetamine. And we're extremely excited to be on the cutting edge of technology as we go forward in that fight. What this machine will do for us immediately, it will allow us to get results in minutes rather than weeks and help us keep bad guys in jail and keep community members safe. It will allow us to utilize the information gleaned from here to further investigations, to go up the ladder, as we say, to get higher and higher on the food chain of drug traffickers. Attorney General Yost talked about some of the struggles we've had, and our struggles are no different than other places. But we have a significant history in combating illegal drugs in this community because we are at a crossroads between Chicago, Detroit, and Columbus. And we have an extremely dedicated and professional drug task force led by Sheriff Matt Bales, County Prosecutor Ray Grogan, as we fight to combat illegal drugs in this community. So we are very, very thankful from our friends at the Attorney General's office in BCI to help us keep our community safe with the addition of these machines that will help us immensely in our fight against illegal drugs. So on behalf of Mayor Scott Schertzer and all of the leadership here at the City of Marion, we couldn't be happier to be at this cutting edge, at the leading edge of technology to help in this fight against illegal drugs, where we have seen so many times our community on the front page for negative reasons. Well, here we are on the front page for something positive as we go forward to try to protect our community. And so, as I said, on behalf of Mayor Schertzer, I want to thank you, and we look forward to being partners with you and our partners in the surrounding region and community as we work together to fight back. So, thank you very much.
Sheriff, Ray, either of you want to say anything?
I'd just like, on behalf of Marion County, to thank you for entrusting us with the equipment. Like Chief McDonald said, you know, we're in a battle here in Marion County. We're at kind of a crossroads between Detroit, Chicago, and Columbus, and we do have a lot of problems here that we are working hard to try to solve. I think we're doing that. Our drug task force has been doing an amazing job. And I can't thank them enough for the job that they have done so far. This helps streamline the process for us. It helps us to keep people in jail before we would have to release them until test results came in, and it's something that will help protect Marion citizens, which I'm deeply grateful for. And I just want to thank you one more time, and for the people of Marion County for entrusting us with the device.
Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf, as the Sheriff just mentioned, of the residents of Marion County, thank you all very much for being here, because I really do believe that we will look back at this day, at this moment, several years from now, as what I'm very hopeful for to be a turning point in our fight against drugs and illegal substances in our community. You are absolutely correct, Attorney General Yost, when you say that Marion really is ground zero for the drug epidemic. And I know that the Marmot Drug Task Force has done everything they possibly can to attack this problem from both a supply side and a demand side. And having the tools at our disposal, such as these now, where we can have quick confirmation of results, allows for quicker charges, which allows my staff to make more appropriate bond recommendations to the court. And in addition to that, that's on the supply side. And on the demand side, it allows us to have quick confirmation, which allows us then to allow for charges being brought that much faster, which ultimately, on the demand side, allows us to get people into treatment that much quicker. And these machines, allowing the officers who've been trained to use them in our community, will undoubtedly save lives as a result of what they can do. And so, on behalf of our entire community, I really do appreciate you, and as the Sheriff said, entrusting us to use these machines, and we are just very grateful. Thank you.
Jessica, I'm sorry? Oh, sorry, we got one more.
One more, thank you, Attorney General.
Excuse me.
Good morning. My name is John Kennewick. I'm the Vice President of the Field Forensics Division at 908 Devices. I want to thank Attorney General Yost, Chief McDonald, and everyone involved in this pilot for inviting 908 Devices to this press conference. 908 Devices manufactures the MX908. The MX908, as discussed previously, is a mass spectrometer. I think the Attorney General did a good job on explaining what a mass spectrometer is, but in the simplest terms, it's the gold standard for chemical analysis. And up until a few years ago, you'd find these in large central labs operated by people that have dedicated years of their lives to science. Approximately 10 years ago, 908 Devices set out to democratize mass spectrometry by developing purpose-built handheld devices that could be used at the point of need in the field for the analysis of chemicals by military personnel, firefighters, and of course law enforcement officers. MX908 is capable of seeing trace amounts of chemicals, and what is trace? It can be invisible, but it also can be a small component in a larger constituency. Think of counterfeit pills or even cocaine spiked with deadly fentanyl. And this traceability enables law enforcement to detect and identify drugs while minimizing exposure. Quick and confident detection of trace chemicals is important. It's important to law enforcement agencies as they need to know what they're seeing for not only their own personal safety, but also the protection of the public. And leveraging technology like MX908 can also speed legal prosecution of drug crimes by reducing the burden on central labs, as discussed earlier. The reason that MX908 as a mass spectrometer is so reliable is that it produces a mass spectral image. It's sort of like a chemical fingerprint that can be used as evidence of the presence of drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, synthetic cannabinoids, fentanyls, and other drugs. We're proud to partner with the AG's office and law enforcement in the state of Ohio. Our employees at 908, like many people in Ohio, have been impacted by the growing drug crisis, losing friends and family members to addiction and overdoses. We're committed to providing the highest level of support to your state's ongoing efforts to leverage technology to the benefit of law enforcement efforts that seek to reduce the burden of cost and the cost of prosecuting drug crimes, and at the same time increasing safety for both officers and the public. We're fortunate to have partners like the Attorney General's office and the law enforcement community here in Ohio, with more than 1,000 of these devices in active use with partners all over the country. These partnerships ensure that we are investing our efforts into real problems impacting our communities. Thank you again for allowing us to participate.
And now we get to see the demonstration. Jessica Toms, as I said, led our assessment team and is Lord High guru of this kind of science. Jessica, thank you for driving up here to show us how this works.
Sorry, it went to sleep while we were all talking, so. So I'm going to walk you through the couple steps that you need to run a test. The first thing that we're going to do is a system suitability check. This shows that the instrument is operating as expected and it's still within its calibration parameters. Once it gets going here. The second thing we're going to do is a blank check. That checks to show that all our consumables are free of contamination and that our system is free of contamination before we introduce a sample. That way you know that the response that you are getting from the sample is representative of the actual sample that was taken and not any contamination in the system. And then last, we'll sample and test an item. I didn't bring any fun drugs today, so I apologize. We've got acetaminophen so that everybody stays safe and I don't have to put additional PPE on. So this is our system suitability check to show that the instrument is working as expected. What we've tried to do with this program and the procedure that the officers are going to use is to introduce processes that we use in the laboratory for assuring the quality of our results. So things like system checks and blanks give you real confidence in the results that you are getting. So in our training, they go through those steps. They have to do a system check at the beginning of each case, and then they run blanks between each item. So you'll see as we go through here, this whole entire process will only take a couple minutes. The same process in the laboratory on a short method will take about 30 minutes to do. It's much more nerve-wracking when we just sit and stare at it. And you're staring at me.
Watched 908.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll hold this up. You can see system okay, baseline okay. So that gives us an indication that we can proceed with testing. If for some reason the system was out of calibration or we had some contaminants that were remaining, we would get an error here, and that would be a cue that we needed to do some additional maintenance or cleaning, so we wouldn't proceed with testing. So the next thing we're going to do is our blank check, and basically this white piece of paper here I'm going to use as my testing surface, so this is where I will sample and do a sample dilution. So I'm going to use a swab, foam tip applicator, a swab, and my paper, and I'm going to put them all on one sample so that I know all of them are not contaminated. I know. This part of the process is basically how long it takes to run an actual test. So you'll see that kind of duplicated here twice. So you'll see no target detected, which means we don't have anything present on our samples, so we can proceed. No contamination. As John from 908 said, this is a trace detector. So really, if you can see it, it's too much to introduce into the instrument. If you think about when you go to the airport and they swab your hands or materials, they're looking for trace amounts of explosives, so things that are kind of invisible. So when we have a drug item, such as this, where you have visible material, we need to dilute it down so that it's an acceptable amount to the instrument, doesn't clog it, doesn't introduce contamination to the next items. So we do that through a dilution series using several swabs. So they would take their foam tip applicator, the officer would. One of the nice things about this device and the reason we selected it is because it is a trace applicator in the field. If this bag had been used multiple times, they could initially take their sample from here at the zipper or on the edge without having to make complete entry into the bag. For this case, I'm going to just sample down here where there's a little bit of white material. I'm not touching a large portion of that. And then I'm going to take my foam tip applicator and run it across the first swab. I'm going to touch my second swab to my first swab, and my third swab to my second swab. And then we're going to work our way backwards from the most dilute swab to the most concentrated. That way we're getting the correct amount in. And always the hope is that you get what you want from that most dilute swab. Especially when there's 20 people staring at you, right? To my trained officers, I didn't paint the screen black, so we're good. So I got an alarm for acetaminophen then, so that was what we were testing for in this instance. If the officer wasn't aware of what the component was that's present, they can see the details related to that drug, any toxicity information, hazards associated with it by scrolling down through the alarm panel to get that information, and then they can make a decision to proceed from there. And that's it. It does a clean cycle itself in between samples. And then they would be done. Any questions related to this? Yes.
What all substances is it able to test for?
So we're using it in drug hunter mode, so it can be used for hazmat materials, chemical warfare components, depending what application you're using it for. For drug hunter mode, I believe there's somewhere between 100 and 200 different controlled substances that are present. One of the nice things about the device is our partnership with the company. As we see things here in Ohio, we've been able to collect that information from our drug samples that are coming into the laboratory and help build that library further. So we're able to collect samples, they'll send personnel on site, and then as we see things, they will add those to the library. Secondly, I would also mention that it's a threat detector. So we're looking for those high hazard substances, things that are normally in most prescription tablets, for example. They're not going to pose as much of a safety risk to officers, and they also don't chromatograph as well either. We have issues sometimes in the lab with them and have to do extra chemistry. So there's not really a necessary need for all of those types of prescription things to be in the library in this type of device. Question?
So, Rob, how cool would it have been to have one of these back when you were on the street in Delaware? Oh man, that pill, that's just Tylenol. But you put the line to that pretty quick. Thank you, Jessica, for the demonstration, and just as a way of thinking about this, you couldn't have even driven down to London, lights and siren. It wouldn't even be there yet, and they've already got results. So this is really exciting, a revolutionary kind of change for us. I really appreciate, again, thank you to all of our partners in this project, and really looking forward to hearing some good stories and seeing some good case law made as we employ this technology. Thanks very much.